Temporarily here because she was going to go over there. When she sat down to that was Is she a micro?
No, I think because so she could
all of us, even those who not only are yeah, forget, I'm only better on this trip. I was not ready to go. And I knew it. I wanted to take a picture of that sign there's a fire station. All attached to the fire station. And there was a sign up front that said, like, gels, bluegrass gel sessions. So, inside the building, there's a lot of Americans inside the building. I'd like the oddity of that. And I went and took a picture of that even though I know I shouldn't.
Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing? It's a nice day out there, isn't it? Yes. Sunny San Diego. Before we start officially, I thought I would just run through a couple of things here that are not really a part of the program, but just interesting information. Sort of. Firstly, does everyone know the address for Wednesday? Yep. I just put it up there in case anyone had missed it the other day. Anyone's welcome to attend, of course, but it would be beneficial for them if they've heard some divine truth. So, yeah. And we have limited space, so you can't bring your family and your dog.
Don't want to see any pets there.
No. All right, I just wanted to let everyone know, some of you already know that Jesus and I are involved in a not-for-profit company in Australia called God's Way. Does anyone not know about that? Yep. So basically it's a company that we set up with a bunch of other people who wanted to try to implement divine truth teachings in a really practical way to make changes in the environment, make changes in child education, these kinds of things. So that is well underway now in Queensland in Australia, and we have the desire for it to expand. But that requires people growing spiritually, because that's the basis of our constitution, that everyone must grow in harmony with God's way, which is what we talk about all the time, in order for that expansion to happen. But the idea is to set up learning centres that people can visit and have a practical experience of what it means to implement divine truth teachings in everyday activities. So that happens every week in Australia at the moment, even when we're not there. It took us quite a while to get to the point where it could happen even when we're not there. But now we have 3 great people who are running the company while we're not there. Their names are Eloisa, Phoebe and Cornelius, or David. And you can find out what's happening here if you visit this site, it's godsway.net, and there's a blog you can subscribe to so you get regular updates, or if you just want to peruse the site, you can see all kinds of interesting things that have already happened. So I just wanted to let you know about that. Also, Jesus and I are planning to continue to travel more regularly. I know we haven't done that for quite a few years overseas. So we're already planning to come back next year to the US, as well as Europe and the UK and Canada. So if you want to hear more about that and potentially register for another event, you can visit mary.divinetruth.com at any time, and that gives sort of semi-regular updates on our life and what we're doing. And when and if we schedule the next overseas trip, I'll announce it there.
That's a blog you can register on as well.
You can. And because our website, divinetruth.com, is still really under construction and not updated very regularly, I've just made this site the place where we just put general updates about Divine Truth, or helpful information, or when there's new materials, that kind of thing. So you can subscribe there. And at any time you can visit event.divinetruth.com and see whatever events we have scheduled, whether that's in Australia or overseas. If you would like to donate to us, thank you very much. You are sitting here because of the generosity of people in Australia who helped to sort of fund this trip. And we have received donations this weekend, which is wonderful. Thank you. It's helped to defray some of the costs of being here in San Diego. So thank you very much for that. If you would like to donate at any time, visit donate.divinetruth.com, and there's various methods to make donations. I think there's MasterCard and bank transfer and Wise transfers there. Okay, cool. That's the dot points I wanted to cover with you guys. Any questions about any of that before we start the good stuff? Nope. All right.
Has
Do you want
everyone...
to say anything? Oh, I can rub it off.
I would like to rub it off. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, does anyone want to take a picture of that? Or everyone's got those sites? Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. On to the human soul.
Yeah.
How's the temperature for everyone in here? Are you hot or cold? All good? Good.
Comfy?
That's good. Hang on. It is tricky, isn't it?
It's better to go that way around. Actually.
Is that?
No, so if you go this
And then
way,
it's looking at
down, and go that way around.
Yes, that's how it's designed.
It's a lot easier. No,
Impossible.
yes, I'll grab the mic so we just do that. So you, Michael.
Lovely. Any volunteers? Yep, Justin and Kim. Thanks, guys.
Okay.
Just don't adjust the record or mute on that, Justin. Yep, just leave it as you say.
Okay. How's everyone doing? Been a bit tricky for some of you with spirit influences, hey, over the last few days. All right, let's look at beliefs matter with regard to the human soul. Shall we? Of course, we could again divide the beliefs into different areas. We could say there's what it is, and then there's how it works. There's those two areas. So what it is, and how it works. Now, sometimes it helps to say what it isn't rather than what it is. That usually helps a lot of people sort of come to get rid of a lot of false concepts about the human soul. So what it is. Now, those of you who've already heard me talk a bit about the human soul, would you like to participate in what it is? What do you reckon it is?
Emotion.
So microphones we'll be using.
Our feelings, emotions, passions, desires.
So you're saying the human soul is feelings, emotions, passions, desires. Is that right? Yeah, that's not what it is. What is that? They're attributes of the soul. That makes sense? So these are attributes of the soul. So you could say done more about how it works than what it is. Can that make sense? Yeah. So whenever you talk about feelings, emotions, passions, desires, memories, thoughts, you're always talking about the attributes of the soul rather than what the soul is itself.
It's sort of like saying, isn't it, that God is love, when that's an attribute of God,
Yeah,
but
so-
not a definition.
So it's not right to say the soul. So one thing is right, in the soul is feelings, right? Or do we say feelings are soul?
No.
So that can be true, can't it? The soul does have feelings, and so far the soul is feeling, but that is not true. Feelings are not the only thing that the soul is. Right? So this is why it's important to see that actually the soul has feelings, emotions, passions, desires. You could say these things are energies coming from the soul, couldn't you? So the soul itself, to describe what the soul is, the soul has to not only be the container for these particular things, but also be the generator of those particular things. Right? So it's not those things in themselves, it's the generator, the motivator for those things. Make sense? Yeah? Okay, so what is the soul then? We haven't yet
We've got another.
really defined it. Yep, so if we go on this side, so front and back, yep,
Yep.
yep.
Actually, you said it's the pinnacle of God's creation.
Well, that certainly is what it is. So it is. Let's say what that means. It's a creation of God. So that is true. That's true. It is a creation of God. So it's not a creature that came into existence through its own process, but rather it was a creature that was designed by a higher intelligence. Right?
So you pass the microphone just behind you.
Straight behind, yeah. Jay?
I was going to say it is the most complex creation of God.
That is true. It is the most complex. Or you could say the highest creation of God.
And the only one that is capable of self-actualization.
Correct. So it's self-aware. Yep, that's true. Anything
Anyone?
else?
Oh, yeah, Kim? Did you have it?
No.
Yeah, Tyson?
Tyson? Yeah. Keep your hand up when you...
Well, it's a child of God.
Well, yeah, I suppose that implies that,
okay.
doesn't it? Yeah, yeah. But we still haven't just sort of defined what it is, have we? We've defined who created it, and we've defined that it's the most complex of the creations, and we've said that it's self-aware, which is really how it works. We still really haven't said what it is, have we?
Jace.
Jason?
It's a living being, it's a living entity.
So it's an entity. What do we mean by an entity?
It's a living, emotionally conscious, aware being.
Yeah, so it's a thing.
Yeah.
It's not abstract.
Mhm.
It's an actual creation. It's not an abstract thing. It's not something like energy that is pulled together or something like that. The soul is capable of pooling energy together and using energy for different tasks, and you guys do that all the time, every single day. But it's still, the energy is an attribute of the soul in itself. So the soul itself is not energy, but it has energy. Yeah? Okay? Any other? So, Si?
It's the image of God that has both male and female parts to it.
Okay, so it is dual in nature. What that means is, if we look at it in terms of a design, if we've got a complete unit, it has masculine and feminine qualities, which don't make it dual in nature, by the way, even though I've drawn it that way, because actually there are souls that are mostly masculine, and there are souls that are mostly feminine. Right? And those souls, when they split, they enter two, like if it's mostly masculine soul, then it enters two male bodies. There's two male bodies that are attached. If it's a mostly feminine, there'll be two feminine bodies attached. So when I drew it like that, what I'm saying is there's two separate parts to it in the way that it incarnates. Right? So you could say how it works is that it incarnates. It has to, in order to become self-aware, it has to go through a process of what we've termed in the spirit world individualization, where you become aware of yourself as an individual. That makes sense? So the process of individualization is another way in which it works. So it is, you could say it's a container which splits into two parts as self-aware beings, and eventually recombines into the one whole as an individual self-aware being. Right? And the reason why it does that is so that each half can learn a lot about processes, but also it also enables the bodies that the whole soul will the ones that are yet to incarnate can incarnate into. The procreation process enables the whole soul to split into two halves and then have, you could say, two separate experiences which eventually combine into one. And so you've got a double chance at everything. Right? So dual in nature, very, very important aspect about the soul. Yep.
I also wanted to say eternal.
That is not known. So a lot of people believe it is internal. So there is a belief that it's eternal. But actually, that's only a belief. It's not a fact. It's unknown as to whether the soul may die under certain circumstances. This is a very important issue for many people who are spirits. In the sixth sphere, this is one of the things that are discussed the most, is the potential of whether the soul's immortal, in other words, unable to die, or able to die. And people in the sixth sphere are discussing this all the time, right? It's one of the primary concerns of the spirits who have lived in the sixth sphere for a long time. Yeah? So people presume that it's eternal, and there is no record as yet of any soul coming from this earth having died, but that doesn't mean that it is eternal or immortal by itself. Now obviously it may have the potential to be immortal if it receives something from God. But aside, if it does not receive something from God, then who knows? It may die over a period of time. Let's say it may die over maybe 1 million years and then it dies. Who knows? Nobody really knows. Does that make sense? Yep. G'day. Anything else? Yes, if we come across just behind.
It's our true identity. It's who we are.
It's who you as an individual are, yes. Now, when you say you, can you say it's not really your true identity because you're half of it? Does that make sense? So the combined soul is your true identity, of which you are one half. This dual in nature is a very important factor in the design of the soul. And see, most people on earth believe that they are individuals in their own right. But that's not true. From God's perspective, the individual is the soul in its complete form, not the two halves. You follow? So yes, but you are right, it is your true identity. So it actually has an entity, and you could say identity.
And can we say something more about
You've all
that?
got a serial number.
This identity is not shared by anyone else, is it?
No.
It's
like our DNA.
it's unique in nature.
It's unique, yeah. So it's not a shared identity, like a group identity.
It's
It's an individual identity. Yeah. Yeah. You could say it's a container for how it works, couldn't you, as well? The whole soul is like a container, and everything passing through it or that is stored in it or released from it or processed from it is all, the container itself is still existing, whether things pass through it or not, and whether it is aware of its dual nature or not. There's still things happening to it all the time. And of course, how deeply self-aware we are requires growth, really. Yeah. So, Thea?
So in the spirit world, you said the spirits call the process of incarnation as a process towards individualization.
Yep.
And the individual is the whole soul.
Correct. Of which you are one half, having an experience to determine that. So both of you together will determine you as an individual in the future. Make sense?
So the individualization process is all the way up beyond the 35th sphere into a soul union state.
Well, you could say it begins at the moment you are conceived. That's when you start. As soon as one half of the soul is conceived, in other words, it incarnates, connects to two bodies created for it on earth, as soon as that occurs, you could say from then on it's becoming aware of itself as an individual. So even when the first half does that, from now on it's beginning the process of self-awareness. When the second half does it, that adds to the process of self-awareness. But of course, both halves will grow, firstly independently, but God's intention was that they would come together at some point and in fact unify at some point. Now, once they are completely unified, you could say the process of individualization is complete in that now the whole soul is aware of itself. So the half of the soul becomes aware from the point of conception onwards, and that takes, well, how long it takes depends upon how desirous the person is. So for Mary and myself, that took 1900 and around 50, well, I'll give you the exact figure. It took us 1933 years for that to occur, right? But there's people in the spirit world who have been around for 150,000 or even 180,000 years and it still hasn't occurred. So it depends a lot upon desire, which is one of the things that drives the soul, one of the energies of the soul. Desire is one of those energies. Yeah. Okay. Michael?
It's a creation of God, similar to God in her image and her likeness.
Yeah, so it's a creation of God similar to in design. You could say, if you think about the human soul has been designed to imitate the way God's soul works. Of course with limitations, but it's been designed to imitate the way God's soul works. Yeah.
And I was going to say limited or finite, but also with potentials.
Correct, it has a limited potential in its own right, but a potential to become divine if it receives something in addition from God. So you could say, as a part of the human soul, it has potentials. But they're only potentials. They're not predetermined potentials. They're not destiny, you could say, or what would you call it? There's another word. Fate. It's not fate that drives. It's all about whether you engage something within yourself. Yeah.
And we can say that in the positive sense and the negative sense, can't we?
Correct.
So sin is only a potential for us.
Yeah.
It's something we
doesn't
engage.
have to happen.
It's not a necessary part of our existence,
Yeah.
and or pain and suffering, but it is something that we engage.
The design allows for its potential.
Yeah. And equally, the potential to receive God's love and experience that love and experience the expansion from that love.
It's designed for that potential, but not a given. It has to be driven by the use of something that you haven't mentioned yet.
Free will?
Free will, yes. So how it works,
Breaking all the rules
one of
there.
the big things it has is free will. Like, so it determines its own destiny, you could say. It determines its own future. So this is something that most people get sort of hung up about, because it's sort of like a lot of religions, a lot of faiths on earth will sort of tell you that it's all preordained or pre-planned, your future. But that's not the case. If God had done that, then you don't have free will anymore, right? So what God's done instead is given you this beautiful gift of free will so that you can determine for yourself. And remember, you're just half of yourself. So who knows what the other half of yourself is determining? But both of you together are determining the destiny of your one soul. Yeah. Which is good when you think about it, because that gives you two chances at everything. And Michael, you want to?
Does God know what all of our decisions are going to be and knows everything all the way to the end?
Yes, he does. Because he's not bound by space, time. These are all constructs that he created. He created space. He created time. He created the years going past. He created the universe itself. He's not bound by any of the limitations of the universe, which means that God can see what happens at any time, now, future, past. He can see all of it. But he doesn't predetermine it. So even though he sees it, he doesn't make it your destiny. Because God knows when you're going to make a choice to do one thing, and he knows when you're going to make a choice to do another. He knows in advance. And in fact, sometimes he even sends spirits to you to try to help you, stop you from making a bad choice. He'll even do that. He'll even send some spirits to you who want to help you. And those spirits know that if you go ahead and do the thing you're thinking of doing, it's going to be bad for you, and they'll try to influence you against doing it, right? But of course you still have will. You can still make your own decision. So there are influences upon the soul, but what you choose to do will be based on the motivations that exist within your soul. One of the energies inside of the soul, one of how it works, is the motivation you have, which is really, you could say, the desire you have, the passion you have to do whatever it is you want to do. Yeah. Max?
Can I ask about that?
Yep.
So if God knows what we're going to do for the rest of our life,
Yep.
Like, why is God interested in having a relationship with us then? Like, wouldn't that be kind of pointless? Like, in a way?
It's your choice to have the relationship. So while God may know whether you're going to make that choice or not, he would still like you to make the choice. And he's always trying to influence you to change your mind. So even though God would know in 5 years' time that you still haven't made that choice, over that 5 years from now to then, God's trying to influence you to make the choice so you can change your own destiny. So God just doesn't go, oh, because Max is not going to decide by 5 years' time, then it's pointless me trying to influence Max before then. Because God knows that your will can be influenced by anybody, including God, in one way or the other, through giving information and allowing you to see things. And so God is trying to still influence you, even though God can see that you probably won't make the decision until 5 years' time. Right? So don't feel that just because God knows what you may do, that God's not trying to change what you may do. Right? Because he is. And we just in here, and then we'll go up the back.
Does the soul have matter? Can you see the soul?
Yep.
Okay.
It's contained of matter that comes from the universe, yes.
When you see the soul, is it in lights, colors? Do you see the sound? Do you see geometry? What do you see?
Well, it depends what eyes you're using.
Okay.
So the spirit body has eyes, and the physical body has eyes, and the soul has eyes, has a way of seeing. And the soul doesn't have a body per se, as we're used to seeing our physical body and spirit body. But the soul itself can still see vision. In fact, it's got far wider vision than we can even imagine in our spirit form or in our physical form. In our physical form, the distance you can sort of see is if you're on the top of a mountain or something, it's usually 30 or 40 kilometres, what's that, about 25 miles or so, 30 miles, and if you get really high mountain, you might see 60 or 70 miles, but you can't make out the detail of what's out there. Like it's just like a big, sort of almost like so far in a distance you can't see the individual trees, and you can just see it's green, or snow or whatever. But the spirit body has the ability to see thousands of kilometres away, and in detail. The detail like it's up close detail. And the soul has the ability to see light years away, right, from itself, its own position. So you've got a growing set of capacities that exist as a part of the soul. So, and I'm talking here about the unified soul.
Yeah.
Because the ununified soul doesn't have that capacity.
You can't access your soul vision until you're unified.
Until you're unified, okay. Yeah. Until then, you're living in a spirit form, and each half is accessing its spirit faculties rather than the soul-based faculties for sight. So you can say all of your senses are available to you as you grow through the body. So we're using this body, we've got different senses. When we get into the spirit world, those senses are all expanded. So they're not limited more, they're expanded more. And that includes expanding in quality as well as quantity. So what I mean by that is that in quantity, meaning that I'm now in this body using this eyes, I can only see visible spectrum. But if I go in my spirit body, there's a wider visible spectrum. The eyes can see a wider visible spectrum. So now they can see colours that in our form now on Earth we can't see, right? And there are colours, you'll notice this when you pass, there'll be colours you go, I've never seen that colour my entire life on Earth. And the higher you progress, the more of those variety of colours you see. And so as you expand in love, your abilities in the soul also improve. Now, initially they are connected to the two first bodies you're using. So you're using, when I say first bodies, what I mean by that is you're capable in your soul of creating bodies to use. But the first bodies, which are the bodies you were born with, remain with you. Right? But you're capable of creating and destroying connections to bodies that you use for purposes. So let's say a spirit wanted to try to influence you to do something on Earth because it looked like you were going to kill yourself or harm yourself, and he might appear to you to influence you in that direction. So to do that, he creates a physical body, not a spirit one, just a physical one, and he then uses his spirit body to influence that body to tell you things and whatever. And then when he's done, he dissipates that physical creation that he made. Right? So the body itself is just like an appendage, you could say, to the soul. And it's appendage to the half of the soul, and it's necessary for the half of the soul to see things and to experience things. Without the body, the half of the soul is not connected to the full apparatus of the full soul for sight and feelings and emotions and desires and passions. The half of the soul needs a body to experience those things. Up the back, on this side, and on this side over here.
I think we mentioned free will, but how about personality?
We haven't mentioned personality. It has a unique personality. And remember that we're talking now still about the whole soul. So the whole soul is a unique personality. So when it splits, that personality appears in both halves. In other words, both halves have the same personality. Because the whole soul is the thing that's been gifted with personality. Yeah?
And can we make a point here about the fact that personality is something that God created, so it's a permanent part of the soul. But when we talk about free will...
Whether the soul is aware or not.
That's right.
Yeah.
When we talk about free will, then we introduce temporary states or temporal things that happen in the soul. So, for example, sin is a temporary state that is created by the soul. Equally, other states of joy and happiness are all things that pass through the soul, and they are not static or permanent as the personality. And character, so you have in every half of the soul, or every complete soul eventually, you have personality and character. And character are the things, the elements of yourself that you have decided to take on that govern your free will choices. But they are also changeable, whereas your personality is not changeable.
Yeah. So a very important thing to understand is that personality is not changeable, but your character is. And it's interesting when we talk a lot about people, you know, when you guys talk about other people and how you interact with other people, frequently you're not talking about their personality, you're talking about their character. And that will change over time. You know, people can change their character, even though a lot of people on earth don't believe that's true.
Often because we're in our addictions, we want certain things from people.
Yeah.
And so it's the character of the person that dictates what they'll give you, addictively or in terms of love or kindness or companionship.
Yeah.
But when we really love, when we love by God's definition, we love the personality of the person. And understanding,
irrespective of their character.
Yes, that character is something that's changeable.
Yeah. So they might be really evil, but you can still love them. Or they might be really good, and you can love them. Yeah. Of course, a person who is good and kind and compassionate is a lot easier to love than a person who's evil. But eventually you get a stage where they're just as easy to love. Yeah. Because you can feel the nature, the personality of the individual, and the character you just sort of see as mud that the individual has imbibed in the course of its life. And remember that we're talking half now, half of the soul. We're referring to, not the whole soul. The whole soul obviously has two individual halves which can appear to be completely unrelated to each other at times because of their poor development of character. Right?
But to unify, you share the same character in the end. You share the same love.
In fact, it's impossible to unify without having the same character.
Yes. Yeah. It's a prerequisite.
Yeah.
But it's in harmony with God's laws, obviously.
Yeah. Okay. So we're over here, and then we'll go to Samir over here.
Okay, so that's kind of like where I'm kind of heading at. So let's say you find your soul, your half, your other half.
Yep.
How do you know, though? How do you really, really know? I mean, for other people.
Well, we've talked a lot about that in the past, and I don't know if I want to talk about that today.
Okay.
The main reason why it's a lot to do with how you develop your character as to how you're going to find the other half, to be honest.
How much you love your personality and how much you refine your character in harmony with love.
Yeah.
That's the surefire way.
Yeah. And there are spirits in the spirit world who have also not received God's love, who know they are with their soulmates, but they are not in the state of a union with each other. They still feel themselves to be two separate individuals. And that happens in the sixth sphere. Frequently, people do find their other half, and frequently they do know that person is a reflection of their own personality, but they can't grow to a union state without receiving something from God. So you could say the union state is one of the soul's potentials, but not a given, because it's driven by your will, your passions and your desires as to whether that will occur.
And is that why sometimes, like, although, you know, you said soulmates are typically born in the same area? Or
Oftentimes, yes.
So, and then sometimes, you know, somebody's a lot older or a lot younger, or...
Usually within 25 years or less, usually. Yeah. Many are within a few years, you know, like most are within a few years. The longer the distance between two, the more rare it becomes, yeah, for lots of reasons, which we won't go into. But, yeah.
And if you're not ready to find your other soul, is because you're closed off, or...
When you say you're not ready, you can say you don't desire it.
You don't desire, okay.
So when you say, I'm not ready, It's interesting how you guys say things about being ready for things. Because you often say, I'm not ready to deal with that emotion yet, things like that. Or I'm not ready to find my soulmate yet. All that means is you don't have a desire for it.
It's sort of a way of denying responsibility for the development of desire.
Correct.
That's those kind of statements.
When you make that kind of statement, you're almost making out that it's some magical thing that in the future sometimes you'll suddenly be ready. And the reality is you'll only be ready when you have a desire for it. So this is why desire is such an important thing to develop. But that's how it works. That's how the soul works. There's a lot we need to talk about how the soul works, isn't there? And we won't get into that today very much because there's already spirits who want to talk to us about what the soul is. But there's a lot we can get into about how it works, because how it works will determine your future. Your entire future will be determined by how that soul works. And when I say your entire future, I mean your future when you're here on earth will be determined by how the soul works, how it's working, whether it's working well or not, whether you understand how it works. And also your entire future in the spirit world and in the union state will be determined by how much you've learnt about how you work. You know, you could say one thing about a self-aware being, it's the only thing that can learn about itself, isn't it? Like so like an animal, not a self-aware being, can't learn anything about itself, right? But a self-aware being is capable of learning things about itself, right? Which is an amazing thing when you think about it, as a part of the individualization identity and a part of the self-awareness that is developed. You come to see it's very important to learn about yourself, very important to understand how you work. And not when I say you, I don't mean your body, I mean your soul. Very important that you come to understand how it works. Because if you have false beliefs, remember the subject of this is beliefs matter, if you have false beliefs about how it works, you'll attempt to do things that are in disharmony with how it works, to your own detriment, right? So one of those things is, I'm going to be an individual for the rest of my life. I don't want to connect to another, I don't want to have a romantic relationship with anybody, right? That's going to be a very, very harsh thing that occurs to the future for your soul. Because your soul has been designed to have a romantic relationship with the other half of itself. Right? So it's very interesting when we try to detune from these things, because in detuning from, you know, and usually it's hurt that causes to detune, but in detuning from certain aspects, we're actually also constraining our future. We're determining what's possible for our future, the future potentials. And so this is why it's so important to understand how the soul actually works. Remember, we need to understand what it is and how it works in order for us to be sort of completely self-aware, really. Yeah. So in the spirit world, there's universities where you go to that you learn how it works. Makes sense? And many spirits will teach you things about how it works when you're on the natural love path. But of course, when you are receiving information from God, God teaches you how it works directly. So you don't need to go to a university then and learn about how it works. So I've never been to a university in the spirit world my entire life, except to teach. Does that make sense? Because I've had my own experience, and God through that experience has taught me how it all works, you know. But one of the things I've been most fascinated about, aside from my fascination with God, is this subject, the human soul. In fact, it's been my primary motivation, aside from my relationship with God, my primary motivation to understand that more than I understand anything else. Because I started to come to terms, even in the first century, started to come to terms that the more I understood about the human soul, the more I would progress more rapidly and enjoy my life more fully. So very important to really have a dedicated view to understanding how the human soul, what it is and how it works. Yep. So when we talk about emotion, well, that's one thing about how it works. But it's not the only thing, of course, right? And this is why when those of you who are very detuned from your emotion, you're shutting down a primary soul faculty And that's going to make it very hard for you to even understand how the soul works. Yeah. So to all of those of you who are in your mind all the time, you don't really understand the net result of staying in your mind. And it's a lot of fear that causes you to stay in your mind. But also in the end, it causes a huge constraint upon the development of your own soul if you stay in your mind. Okay? And we were up the back, weren't we? On this side, were we?
Right.
So on this side, Simeon, on this side, over there. This side.
You and Mary were saying that the character is something that can be developed and refined.
Correct.
And the personality is permanent.
Yes.
But
you've got to learn how to use it, don't you? The personality.
Okay.
You've got to learn to become your big personality. Okay. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Each of you have a big personality, but most of you are not using that personality.
That much.
Yeah. You're trying to be an ant when you're a mountain. You know what I mean?
Sure.
In terms of the personality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's say for big tiny.
Yeah.
So can the personality, can it also be developed?
No.
Or is it more?
It can be realised and understood and engaged more fully, more powerfully, but qualitatively it can't be changed.
So it can't be refined, it can't.
It can be, no, when you say refined, can't be refined. It can be qualitatively grown. In other words, you can be yourself more and more and more and more and more and more, but substantially you won't be able to change your personality ever. God designed your personality from the beginning. And one of the joys of life actually is discovering your personality and then being that person. Make sense?
And perhaps what you're alluding to in the question, I'm not sure, but you know, a lot of times our personality can be, it's being expressed even in our sin, even in our flawed character, and that can be refined. But you're not
But that's
actually,
only refining the character.
It's just refining your character, which means that you have more of a loving expression of your personality. But your personality does influence even the way that you choose to sin, but it is a static set of sort of features about you.
Yeah, that you can grow in its power, but you can't change it. Okay. You can think of your personality as your serial number, because that's really what it is.
But
your
it's
personal identity.
Far cooler than a serial number.
So it's like you're 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, you know, A, B, C, whatever. That's your serial number. Well, that's what God defined as your personality. So in the celestial heavens, you sort of forget people's names a lot. This is why one reason why I'm not that good at names is because you forget the names because you can feel the personality of the person. To then, when the more expansive the personality, whenever you hear of whenever you think of the person, you're thinking of their personality. You're not thinking of their name. You're thinking of the personality. On Earth, you're thinking, two people can have exactly the same name, can't they? Like if you go to South America, there's like lots and lots of Jesuses, Jesus, right? And same name as me. So which one of us is the one that existed in the first century and so forth? Well, that is all determined by the personality and the experience, right? Yeah.
There's a lot of pain and suffering on earth because people are hating their personality, acting against their personality. It's a big cause of pain.
Yeah. And often our parents try to suppress our personality very early in our childhood because they don't like our personality very much. Because our personality challenges their beliefs.
And then we decide to act in harmony with that to try to avoid the pain.
Yeah. And
then we grow into adults who try to suppress our personality.
So one of the worst things you can do to yourself is to suppress your own personality. In a culture like in America, this is happening all the time. Western cultures, but also very judgmental cultures. Ones that are worried about TikTok and Facebook and image-focused cultures are very much about suppressing personalities.
Trying to have everyone have the same expression of themselves.
Yeah. So the trouble when you do that is you're going to create facades. In other words, you get to the point where you can't even recognize who you are anymore because you've imbibed facades. And facades are all about the character that you've imposed upon the personality. Yeah. For what purposes, you know. Yeah. You can see the more we discuss it, the more questions there are. This is the fascinating thing about the human soul. And by the way, none of this was occurring when we were talking about God. Can you see most people on earth are not fascinated by God, right? And because of that, they don't have any, what's God like here and what's God like there, they don't have any of that going on. But when you start talking about the human soul, it's like, you know, there's a lot more questions about every time you make a statement, there's like, opens up a pathway of more questions each time. Yeah. Where were we up to that?
Judith,
Judith, we start with Judith and we come forward and then back there. And Cheng on this side.
No,
sorry, we're Flista. So Flista, let's go first.
The soul determines our law of attraction. Like we can check minute by minute the condition of our soul.
Well, it's not your law of attraction. It's God's law of attraction because God created all the laws. But how the law of attraction works is whatever is in the content of your soul, if it's in harmony with love, the universe will reward it. And if it's out of harmony with love, the universe will correct it.
Yeah.
And that's how the law of attraction works. The purpose of the law of attraction is to correct the soul out of harmony with love and to reward the soul in harmony with love.
And to expose truth, isn't it?
Yeah, for the purpose of truth and love and lots of other, you know, developing faith and other qualities as well. The law of attraction is something that helps you develop qualities. In other words, as we mentioned, there's a separation between personality and your character, and the law of attraction is helping you develop your character, while at the same time helping you to accept your nature, your personality. So that's it. And the law of attraction, by the way, the law of attraction doesn't only affect the human soul. All of the physical objects that are made out of matter in the universe are all governed by the law of attraction. So the law of attraction isn't a law that's just created for the purpose of the soul, whereas other laws are just created only for the purpose of the soul.
But perhaps to your point, we can say part of the nature of the human soul is that it is the entity which God's laws operate on in terms of our spiritual development. Yeah. Of course, as other laws...
And by the way, we need to say all of God's laws operate upon the soul, whereas with other laws, they operate on physical matter in different ways.
And on our physical body.
And on our physical body. But every single law that God has created operates upon the soul one way or the other.
Yeah, so that's a good point.
Where were we over here? Judith.
The unique personality would also be an attribute or quality of God, because God only creates what God knows. So I would kind of have a personality similar to a portion of God.
Yes, but because God's infinite in nature, obviously God has an infinite amount of personality traits that most humans at this stage, even in the union state, still don't understand. And so as to knowing what they are, the best way you can do it is by getting to know other people. So if I get to know the Judith soul, which is not just Judith, it's Judith and partner, so we call it the Jap soul, or Judith and partner, that stands for, right, the G-A-J-A-P soul. And that whole soul will have a part of God's personality inbuilt into it, which will be different to what is a part of Mary and mine. So that means that Mary and I, when we meet you, we go, "Your Judas is an interesting person," because there's things that we in our nature that we have that you don't have, but vice versa too, that you have that we don't have. So this causes you to feel very interested in all of God's children, because every new child you meet tells you something more about God's nature. Yeah.
Is that helpful in connecting to God, to know your own personality? Like if I feel God is this certain way?
Yeah.
That would be kind of leaning towards, I'm a little bit like that too?
Yeah, well, God will actually share with you even eventually what parts of God's nature your personality is. So that's very helpful too.
It's very helpful to connect to God in order to experience more of your nature. But coming to accept and love your nature or your personality is a really great way to also connect to God.
To God.
Yeah.
Yeah. And remember, when you're just a perfect natural human, not having had any relationship with God, you don't really fully yet understand your personality. Yeah. And there's a lot of things you won't understand as in your perfect human state that is only possible to understand if you receive some of God's nature, particularly God's love. And without that, you won't ever understand things. So there's spirits in the sixth sphere who are trying to understand things, but can't, because the mind is incapable, and you have to develop the soul, and the soul has to be developed in love, and it has to be developed in God's love, not in your own. See, you have a love, your soul has love, and you can love is a trait. You could say it's a character trait.
Yeah, you don't automatically have
You
love.
don't automatically have it.
You have.
So the whole concept that you're born loving, that's not true. You're born neutral. If you were born loving, it would be very hard for you to ever become unloving. And as we can see on earth, it's very easy for many to become unloving, not very hard. So that tends to indicate, doesn't it, that we were born neutral, that we could decide with our will, we can decide one way or the other.
And crucially, we have to use our will in order to love. It's an active state, an active emotional state. So when we're born, we're not even conscious of our own will. This incarnation process is to make us become aware of our will. Yeah. So it'd be impossible to love when we're an infant because we don't
know how to use our will yet. Yeah. So, but we're in a state, you could say, that is free of sin to a large degree when we're born. So usually most people, when they're born, they're in a fifth or fourth sphere state, and that state is much more free of sin than their adults, their parents are in. And so in that state, they might give the appearance of being more loving, but it's just a conditional state rather than a use of will state. Right? And this is why frequently that's all misinterpreted by people. The other thing too, that's very important to say, is the human soul is not and can potentially never be divine. So this whole concept that we're all a part of God anyway, we're all got God's divine nature in us, all untrue. You do not. You were created by God, but you don't have God's divine nature in you unless you ask for it. Right? So even a child, a lot of people say he's so divine, No, he's not. He's a human. He's just closer to his perfect state than you are. Right? Because of his being a young human who is yet to sin very much. He's closer to his perfect state, but he's not divine. And potentially may never be divine. Because to become a part of the divine, to receive a part of the divine, you have to ask for it. The use of your free will, which I haven't written here, have I?
Yeah.
Which I better
Very
do.
important.
The use of your will. Yep. Where were we? Cheng, we were next. Were we here? And then over here with
Ellen, if we come to Ellen.
Yeah, and then back.
Okay, going back to personality and characteristics.
Yep.
I've been noticing a lot more that it's more common if people change their name from like Joe to John because they feel like John suits them more than Joe. Is that based off characteristic? Or
it's often based on
like
spirit influence. Unfortunately, many people would prefer not to be themselves, and in the process of preferring that, they allow a spirit is allowed to. They are wanting a spirit to connect to them, so that they can instantly not be themselves. And when that spirit connects, frequently the spirit will ask for the person to change their own name, so there's a stronger bond, right?
And the person themselves feels like, I want to be someone different, and now I feel like there's things I can express that I didn't before, which is really the spirit and the spirit's personality. So this is very common, especially when people change their name quite significantly, and you see this happening with
lots of influences.
Lots of influences, yeah.
Now, every celestial spirit eventually just uses the name, if they ever refer to themselves, that they were born with on earth. So any spirit who's coming to you with a fancy name that they have never used before is often, is not a celestial spirit.
Yeah.
So I'm still Jesus in the celestial heavens. We've got a body there that we use. It was our first century body, which we still use.
Bodies,
Mary has her body and I have mine. When you say Mary and I, it's really our soul has both of those bodies. We still use those bodies in the celestial spheres. And so when people meet me, they don't, I haven't renamed myself, you know. They meet me, I'm still Jesus, Mary's still Mary. You follow? Yeah. Of course, the serial number of our soul, which is our personality.
It's like the unique signature.
The unique signature of our soul is recognisable as well when you meet the person. Often the unique signature of their soul is recognisable.
But on earth, when people change their name, it's usually because a combination of two factors. They really don't like their own personality because of the way they've been harmed in the past in relation to their personality, and they're carrying a lot of pain that they don't want to deal with, and so they think this,
and they want a magical experience of change.
And then they attract a spirit who impresses that upon them.
Yeah. Very common. Happens very commonly over the centuries, you know, but.
And even some people who just alter their name, usually they will tell you about an experience where they decided, I just wanted to express myself differently, and usually it's when they want to avoid like a transition in their life, but they haven't dealt with the pain of the transition, and they just want to be a different person, be a different version of themselves. And that might not be spirit overcloaking, but it is still the avoidance of pain.
Now, many spirits on the natural life path, even in the spirit world, do change their name. And when they when it goes from one sphere to another sphere to another sphere, they change their name. And for similar reasons to what we've just mentioned, actually. And it's always indicative of the fact that they're trying to get away from something as well. We were over here.
Thank you. Does the soul choose
higher with the microphone?
Does the soul choose the parents, or does God choose the parents? And do the parents choose the name, or does the soul choose the name?
Well, when you say choose, it depends what you're implying.
I'm not sure.
So some people, when they say I've chosen this child, or this child,
I chose my parents.
I chose my parents. You know, the soul chose my parents. The reality is, it's impossible for a newborn, a newly incarnated soul to choose its parents in an active manner. In other words, as an exercise of its conscious free will, because it has yet to know that it has one. But that being said, there are certain personality traits in the soul coming to the parents that the law of attraction, God's law of attraction, has meant that child is ideal for those particular parents, right? So you could say the child hasn't chosen the parent, not actively or consciously, but the soul's personality is attracted to that parent, or remember the two parents, of course. Instinctually attracted, you could say, to the two parents. Now, with regard to the parents choosing the soul, it is possible to do that, but in a conscious manner, but the majority of people on earth don't even believe in that. And so most things are happening at a very emotional level, or an injured level frequently from the parents' perspective, as well as a mixture of their personality. So in other words, they have a certain personality and the child has a certain personality. The child is unaware of its personality, and the parents, for the large part, are also unaware of theirs, because they've suppressed theirs for a long time. But there are laws that say these two personalities are the best personalities to get together for the purpose of the parent and the child. Is that for the development? If under ideal circumstances, development was allowed. Unfortunately, because the parents generally are trying to shut down their own personality, and they're pretty likely to shut down the child's personality as well. And so, of course, that doesn't work out the way God intended it to work out, right? And that's because of human sin, that it hasn't worked out the way God intended. But when it comes to the child making choices, when it incarnates, it cannot make a choice based upon its free will use of making a choice. It can only instinctually make choices based on its personality. And God designed the laws that govern which personalities work better with other personalities and so forth for that purpose.
And the parents choose the name. Yeah, it's not the soul can't choose their name.
No.
So since I was a little girl, it has troubled me that some children are born to parents that are very abusive, very mean.
Yes.
And others are very kind and very helpful.
Yes.
And I always wondered why God would do that.
Well, God didn't do that.
Right. That's what I'm wanting to understand.
Yeah, God designed a system where every parent would be loving and every child would be attracted based on personality of the parents, and when they got together, there would be an ideal mixture of the two personalities for the child to develop its own personality. That's what God designed, but unfortunately human sin creates a lot of other problems, including the suppression of the child's personality and abuse of the child. And many of you believe, the way many of you believe that child abuse is not the way God views it either. From God's perspective, many of you are abusing your children right now, right? So what God sees as abuse is very different to what humans see as abuse.
What humans see as abuse is abuse, but God sees there's a whole lot more abuse going on that humans are saying is normal,
Not abuse.
fine, loving even.
Or within the scope of normal.
Yeah.
But sometimes God even feels much more strongly about that than the physical abuse. And the reason why is because the physical abuse, generally a child will recognise it in its growth. But the other forms of abuse, which are more, you could say, malicious and manipulative, the child will often not see it for its entire life. And therefore it has a much longer effect on the child than the physical abuse does. So I'm not saying physically abuse your children. I'm saying don't physically abuse your children, don't sexually abuse your children, don't emotionally abuse your children, but also understand that many of the things you think are normal interactions with your children from God's perspective are abuse of your children. But that's a side issue.
And some children are born severely handicapped, and some are born perfectly healthy. And
yeah, well, that's also because of the sin of the lineage generally. So oftentimes what will happen in a lineage of people is that there will be certain emotional injuries, certain sins that are engaged by the lineage more than other sins. And some sins cause a destruction or an imposition upon the genetic structure of the bodies. So these people, and as a result of the lineage, the genetic structure is damaged, and so when the child incarnates, it's still incarnating into the ideal emotional environment or the ideal personality environment, but because of the damage of the lineage, it also now physically is affected by the damage of the lineage, right? Again, caused by human sin. As soon as a person enters the spirit world, there are huge attempts made to correct all of that, right? And
we should say, yeah, there's huge attempts to correct sin on earth.
Oh,
but
that's a given,
yeah,
I think.
Yeah.
Because the laws are operating all the time to correct sin.
But the physical limitations you're referring to.
The physical limitations of the physical body that are caused by genetic defects in the physical body. By the way, there are none in the spiritual body. The defects are only affecting generally the physical body with regard to the genetic structure of the physical body. They are corrected once the person passes. So that's clearing away the damage done by the forefathers is done and there are different processes that happens with. With God, it's a very seamless process. For people on the natural love path, it's a bit more convoluted process, but involves others. But those things are done generally soon after passing.
So God created a personality, and a personality then, by the law of attraction, attracts the parents.
With the ideal personality for that child to grow up in an environment learning its own personality, assuming all things were sinless.
Yes, assuming everyone wanted to love.
Yeah, assuming everyone wanted to love. Of course, God knew that sooner or later there might be people who choose not to love, right? And maybe all of us have done that, right? And so what God did then is God also gave corrective laws that affect the human soul specifically, so that you can repair any damage that is done to any body or the soul itself. And when I say any body, I mean the spirit body or the physical body or the soul itself.
Were all the souls created at the same time?
That is unknown. But there are billions of souls that we have seen in the union state. You can only really see them in the union state. You can sense them in states before then, but can't really see them. But in the union state, you can see them. And in the union state, we've seen billions of them.
That are not yet incarnate.
Untold billions that are yet to incarnate.
They're not in this, they're in a unified state, but they haven't used their will to reach the soul union yet.
They're like yet to begin their experience.
And when do they divide between?
At the time of conception of the first half.
First half, yeah.
So God creates the soul, and then it comes into the parents.
He's created the soul with an instinct to incarnate.
Okay.
Yeah. And so the souls are, as soon as the sexual act goes on, it's a really interesting process actually, because as soon as two people engage in sexual activity, they are surrounded by potentially incarnating souls.
So half would go one place and half would go the other place.
That's right, it will go to a different spot.
Yeah, if conception occurred.
If conception occurred.
Of course, many times people are having sex and no conception occurs.
And under those circumstances, of course, nothing happens. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, now, I just, before we continue, what was it I wanted to say? There's a few other things I need to say about how it works that we haven't listed yet. And more about how it doesn't work, actually. All right, so if we go, yes, up to Vijay. Yep, yep. Down to Michael on this side.
Vijaya, is it Vijaya or Vijaya?
Vijaya.
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 Yep.
So going back to the qualities you were listing there of what the soul is.
Yes.
Is it fair to say that the soul is the only creation of God that is capable of creation on its own?
No. When you think about it, animals get together and create other animals. So it's not correct to say that the soul is the only thing that can create. However, it is correct to say the soul is the only thing that can be self-aware in the process of creation. Make sense? But if you think about it, even bacteria create.
Yes, actually I wasn't thinking about procreation and reproduction. I'm thinking more along the lines of we pull from all the potential. I mean, that's kind of how I visualize that every choice I make.
Yeah, but that's a very limited view of creation. Like if you, I suppose this is now more a theoretical thing that you need to sort of grasp, and that is that almost every living entity creates in some way, but they are not self-aware. They are instinctual in the process. The soul is self-aware, so now the soul can get things from here and get things from there and get this from here and use its intention and do all of that and get things that it didn't know about even and mix them all together, whereas obviously other creatures can't do that. They're basically doing an instinctual process. There's no choices involved, whereas with the soul you have choice involved in the process of creation. Yep. Yep.
I have two things. Is one of the areas you want to go that the soul is subject to law?
Very important. So subject to law. So I might just. I'm about that picture there. Say it's subject to law.
So this is part of how it works, isn't it?
It's a part of how it works, yep. Very important thing to bear in mind. See, a lot of people feel that the soul is beyond law, but actually it is the thing subject to the most laws in the universe, because there are whole groups of laws that were created just for physical things and matter, but for the soul there's a whole group of laws that only apply to the creation of the soul itself, right? So it's subject to the most laws. And now you can sort of see why, because if a being's self-aware, it has the potential to do a lot more damage to the universe than if the being's not self-aware. So naturally there needs to be laws that govern its ability to use its self-awareness, its will, yeah, which would be beyond the laws required to influence, say, an animal that isn't self-aware and unable to develop its will.
And about names, I think of there's a fellow, Fred Winterly, who had several names, and it seemed fine, but
well, he's on the natural love path. Yeah. So all of the books of the Through the Mist, Gate of Up to the Gate of Heaven, the Life Elysian, and that's all describing the natural love path. It's not describing the divine love path.
Is Krishna a natural love spirit?
Well, he was at the time of the writing in the book, yes.
Okay.
As was Willow Millie as well. Right. Yeah. Every spirit mentioned, actually, in the book, aside, there was a few times when I was mentioned, but almost every other spirit mentioned was on the natural love path. However, there were a few that were not aware they were on the divine love path. And one of those was, remember the lady, the poet, the poetess, that Fred...
that he liked.
Yep. She was on the divine love path, but she didn't understand she was yet. Right, so we can talk to some of them, maybe. I don't know about today, because there's a long lineup of yeah. You've got lots of questions, but they have too, right? So we've just got to manage that somehow. If we come down here, and then if we come back to this side, so the two girls next to each other.
Can you list some personality traits for us?
I would rather not, because it's very hard to put into language personality traits. So you see, a lot of times when you guys describing what you believe are personality traits, they're actually character traits you're describing, not personality traits. And in fact, there is no human language for the proper description of personality traits. Yeah. So, you know how you sometimes say, oh, he's a bit obnoxious, or something. Well, that's not a personality trait, right? You say, oh, he's very strong and definite about what he wants to do. Well, that's not a personality trait, that's a character trait. You see, a lot of things we think are personality traits are actually character traits. And so many of you, like some of you think, I'm a shy person. Well, that's not a personality trait either, that's a character trait. You're not going to be shy people in your future. Like, in your future, it's like once you get rid of the whole injuries of divine shyness, you're going to find you're going to be just as outspoken as the next person. You understand? So a lot of what we define as personality traits on Earth are not personality traits. Almost all of it is not personality traits, they're character traits. Right? So even your love for truth is not a personality trait. It's a character trait. You can define, you can grow your love for truth, you can develop it. So it's not a personality trait. Right? As I said, there are no words on earth to describe what personality traits actually are. Yeah. They're all defining to almost every extent a character trait. So this is the problem when a group of people are in their intellects, is that when you're in your intellect, you want to start defining everything, and then you start applying it to personality when it's got nothing to do with personality. Right? And this is a very common thing to do. And so people on the natural love path do this all the time. but not understanding that it's not a personality trait. Yeah. So I don't know how we're ever going to talk to you about your personality traits. There's no English words that we can really use to describe them. You're going to have this relationship with God probably in order to feel them and to feel what you feel like. Does that make sense? Yeah. So we meet many people in the spirit world, even in the sixth sphere, who have never ever understood their own personality at any level. And the reason why they don't is because they've just learned to become the person they are, but they have not, and they've gotten rid of their sin, but they have not had a relationship with God where God can show them who they really are. And so they're in the process of still discovering who they really are. In the sixth sphere, one of the reasons why people stay there without progression is because every day they are having new experiences about their personality, sort of discovering new things about themselves. And so it does start to feel like that every day then becomes like a new day, you know, something new you can look forward to. But when it comes to describing what they then feel, most of them are not able to. Okay.
So about sexuality, I understood that sexuality is exclusive to each part of one's soul. Is it about how it works, or what is...
Yeah, well, sexuality is really about how the two halves bind with each other in a romantic sense. So God designed the whole soul to be in a romance with itself. Right? And what that means is the two halves, God designed to be in a romance with each other, but eventually you get to the stage where you're sort of romantically involved with yourself, because it's eventually the two halves merge. And so God designed it that way, and there are certain things that God did to the human body as well as the spirit body. God gave appendages to both bodies to enable the romantic sexual nature to be developed when the development of the bodies were ready for such things. So that's why, you know, like, so all of us are born with a vagina or a penis, but at the end of the day, we don't really start wanting to use them until such a time as we start to develop our romantic parts of ourselves, which are triggered. There's soul-based functions that occur that once a person gets to a certain development, that causes the body to go through changes, and then these bodies go through changes in order to trigger the awareness that we have a romantic partner. There's another half of ourselves out there somewhere. Yeah.
Earlier you were saying that when we were talking about God, we weren't as fascinated.
Yeah.
Why is it that we're so much more fascinated with this than...
Well, because the average person believes that God is so far off and so distant and so unable to be understood that it's pointless even having the conversation. But when it comes to the human soul, you've already had some experience with it, because you're in one. You are one. And you've had some experience with it. And so what we generally find, and this is the case on earth as well as in the spirit world, people are more fascinated with the lectures about the soul than they are about God and God's nature and character and attributes. But God is actually infinitely fascinating, whereas you are finitely fascinating. So if we can put it like that. So obviously, the more interested we are in the relationship with God and feeling God's nature and personality and feeling the different attributes and aspects of that, the more we're going to grow in terms of our capacity to understand everyone around us as well, because obviously we see bits and pieces of God's nature and personality inside the people as we meet them. And so we see how intimately acquainted God is with all of her children through that process. God knows what you are because part of God is that already in an infinite way. So, you know, this is a beautiful part of what God's designed. And you know, for a large part, you'll probably, my feeling is you'll probably be growing. Once you receive God's love, you've got the capacity to infinitely grow in your expression of your personality. And so you're just, when I say grow, I don't mean it's qualitatively changing, but the capacity in quantity grows in the way that you express. And there are aspects of yourself that you're continually discovering that you didn't know were there. And that was just because you were unaware they were there. They were always there, right? But you were just unaware they were there. And so that's a very interesting part of your own personal growth. Yeah. Yep. There's a few things we've said that how it works we need to probably still say is now. Yeah. So Max, you want to have a stab?
Yeah, and up the back. Yep.
It can have relationships, and it can connect to its creator.
Okay, so that's a part of its potentialities, isn't
Oh,
it?
it's not all.
Yeah, so you could list all of them as potentials. Potential for a relationship, potential for a connection to the Creator, and actually also potential for assimilating energy or awareness from other creations as a part of that. So even like trees and animals and everything, the soul is capable of assessing and having the flow of energy into itself to understand those things. Makes sense? So the soul is capable of all of those things, yes. Yeah. Up the back.
I was going to say, I think a similar thing, just that it's the only part of us that we can use to have a real relationship with God.
Correct. Very important to understand that your physical body and your spirit body do not have a relationship with God. Your soul does. And it's your whole soul that does, of which you are one half. That's what has a relationship with God. So your bodies are coming along for the ride, aren't they? You know that. So a lot of people say, "Oh, whenever I feel God, I feel this lovely sensation in my physical body's chest." And I go, "Well, that may be true, but thinking that that is the experience of love, receiving love from God, when actually it's the emotion that's more important than the physical sensation." Like, in the end, your body's going to have lots of physical sensations. They are created to have physical sensations, so because of the sensory apparatus in them. But in the end, none of that is what God defined as the desire to receive love and the results of it. A lot of it is just the subsequent result of the soul growing because it's received some love. So most of the time when these warm fuzzy feelings come, they're spirits who are just transmitting energy, different emotions to the person, giving the person the illusion that they are connecting to God because the person feels they need that. Yeah.
I guess a question for clarification.
Yep.
When I look at animals, they seem to have the ability to suffer, feel pain, and even make choices. If they don't have soul, what in them allows them to
make choices?
Make choices.
Their ability to feel suffer and feel pain.
Suffering pain.
Yeah. So animals have been created with certain physiological functions, and also these physiological functions, depending on the development of the animal and the type of animal, may also exist in a spirit body form. So in other words, if an animal has a central nervous system, then the animal exists in spirit body form as well as physical body form. Now, those physical bodies and spirit bodies, in the case of those ones that have central nervous system, and we'll talk about the ones who don't in a minute, but we'll separate the two. The ones that have a central nervous system, so you're talking things like mammals, obviously, and many other creatures too, fish and other things like that, all have central nervous systems. And the ones with central nervous systems, they have the central nervous system of the animal has been designed to determine the difference between what it views as instinctually pleasurable versus what it views as instinctually painful. And this is an instinctual process, not a choice process. So it's going to gravitate towards the thing that is pleasurable and also try to avoid the thing that is painful. Right? And it does this because God designed them to survive as long as possible. If it didn't have this, if the creatures with a central nervous system didn't have that capacity, then they wouldn't know what is bad for itself and good for itself. And therefore they wouldn't even eat. They wouldn't even drink. They wouldn't even, do the things they need to do in order to survive. So God designed them that this nervous system would provide a method to allow for survival to occur, and that they would engage the personal process, you could say, not in a self-aware way, the instinctual process of surviving. Right? And for most of the creatures with a central nervous system, they also have a brain of some kind that defines how the central nervous system works, and that brain also connects to them. They do have a brain in the spirit world, which you could call their mind, but it's not a self-aware mind. It's an organ that controls their body in the spirit state.
And it can learn.
It can learn,
Yeah.
but it can only learn based upon pleasure or pain. It can only learn, oh, this is pleasurable, that's painful, if this is pleasurable, so we need that, this is painful, we need that, and this is for the point of survival. Yeah? Now, there are groups of animals that have been created, you could say fauna that's been created for the purpose just of physical life. And these ones all do not have a central nervous system. And they are things like insects, for example. Now, insects also have a built-in instinctual process, but it's not centrally developed in a central system, a brain-based system. Most organisms that are not central nervous system based have, you could say, information of how things work is stored in different cells and in different locations. And so some, like insects, for example, have like 4 or 5 brains. One brain to handle the sight, one brain to handle the excretions, one brain to handle the reproduction and so forth, and they're all independent of each other. And also most insects do not have a nervous system, which means that they're unable to feel pain. So they are driven by just the need instinctual need to just do what is necessary to be done to continue the lineage of that particular creation. And the reason why God did that is because he wanted them to have a group philosophy rather than an individual one. And he also did it in such a way that allows them to have benefit for the creation that he created the benefit to be. So an example of that is like a plant needs to procreate. Many plants, some plants do it by themselves, but other plants need pollination. So the insect needs to survive, it needs food, and the plants provide the food, so now the insect is drawn to the plant for its own sake. It's not aware that it's pollinating the plant, it's not self-aware, it's just drawn to the plant because that's its food. And it takes that food, and in the process of taking that food, the plant is pollinated. So these kind of symbiotic relationships were created particularly on Earth, so that for the survival of plants and the survival of even survival of humans, like food production is all about that. So God created a whole layer of creatures, you could say, that all without central nervous systems that are provided for this purpose. And they don't have a spirit body, and they die. When they die, they are dead. They don't ever exist again. They just decompose into matter. And there are no spirit relationships they form. Like a mammal will form spirit relationships with people as well as other animals, whereas a insect will not. So when an insect comes to bite you, he's only looking at you for a number of different reasons. One is you're a source of food. Right? Secondly, your soul has certain signatures which say that your body is dying. So when you don't love yourself, your body is dying. And anything that's dying, these creatures have been created to destroy anything that's dying. That makes sense? So your soul in sin is dying. It causes your bodies to die. Your body's dying means that now your soul has attracted anything around it to get rid of the bodies that are dying, whether that be bacteria or insects or animals or whatever. Yeah. This is part of how your soul works.
When you said that some of the animals have a spirit body,
yep.
Can they, and you also seem to mention that they can have a relationship with us like other spirits. Is that true?
No, they can't have a relationship that's self-aware on their part. They just like the feelings coming from you.
But
So
they,
they're...
Got it. So they can be an influence like other spirits, though they are...
Well, it's not like other spirits. Spirits are people who are self-aware. The animals are not self-aware. Even in spirit form, they're not self-aware. They only have instinctual behaviour, some of which is controlled by the human soul's condition. Yeah. A lot of which, actually, is controlled by the human soul condition.
The soul really governs that interaction.
Yeah. So the animals feel your closeness to love and feel more attracted to you depending on circumstances. Now on Earth, a lot of animals are not even attracted for that reason. Most animals that are your pets are not even attracted to you for that reason. They're attracted to you because you feed them and it makes it easy for them to get food. And so they love you. Right? And that's the only reason.
Well, they don't really love
They don't really love you because they don't experience love. They just want to be with you because you give them the food. Yeah. You stop giving them the food, then you'll see how much they really love you. Any sense? You'll find they don't, right? They'll just go somewhere else for the food. Yeah. Okay, where are we at? 12:30? Yep. If we come to Justin, Jordan, sorry.
This is more of a question on how the soul works.
Yep.
Does the unique personality utilize its passions for as a...
Well, no, the development of your passions is a character trait. The fact that you have passion is a soul design, but you can suppress your passion almost completely. You can almost be completely dead. You can be so shriveled up in the way that you exercise passion that you don't have any at all.
But your passion is unique to your personality.
The direction in which
The direction,
it can be exercised.
So passion as an expression of desire and will is not unique. Every soul has a potential for that, but the way your passion, the way you feel drawn to express your passion, is a reflection of your personality.
Yeah. So that you will use your passion in one direction, like you might like art, so you draw things. I might like music, so I do music. So that's an example. We both have a passion for something, but you have a different one than I do based on your personality, hopefully. But a lot of people believe that music is a personality trait. And a lot of people believe that art is a personality trait, and it's not true either. But none of those are personality traits because anybody can do them. Right?
The way that you do them will
be defined by your personality.
Yeah. And your sin sometimes.
And your sin sometimes. Many artists we meet are completely defined by their sin. so, yeah. Yes.
Does the soul have humility, or does it have to develop humility?
No, it does not have humility. It has to develop it. It doesn't have faith. It has to develop it. It doesn't have love. It has to develop it. It doesn't have truth. It has to develop it. So all the principles that we've been teaching you are things you need to develop. That's why we've been teaching you them, because you need to develop them. If it was personality, we just wouldn't bother teaching you. Does that make sense?
And it's a good question, because a lot of times, we see children are less blocked to emotion, but that's not this, and so they feel more readily. But that's not the same as the development of your will to feel, to experience, so that a child is very open in a sinless environment to the development of the will towards humility, but they are not yet humble.
Yeah, you could actually say the sixth sphere state in which the child was created, because that is the perfect natural love state that the souls before they incarnate are actually in. In that state, they are open to anything. Right.
And they're not yet in the state that a sixth sphere spirit is in, because the sixth sphere spirit has developed their will to reach that state. Yeah.
So completely different. Yeah. Yeah.
So, when a human soul sins, I'm aware it's a sin to God and to
Yourself.
its own self. Yes.
Yeah, every time you sin, you're harming yourself.
How does it? I'm not sure how to word it. How does it work when you sin and you hurt other people? It affects other people.
Yes, there are laws that cause certain things to happen to your soul whenever you harm someone other than yourself, which are more extreme than if you just harm yourself. And when I say more extreme, it's probably not the best way to say it, because from God's perspective, your harm of self is just as bad as your harm of another, because you're equal to others.
Can we say that there's more consequence? Because when I sin to harm you, I'm not only there's a consequence for harm of you,
Correct.
but also a consequence on me for the use
Of your desire.
of my desire to harm
Sorry.
another person. So I have a consequence
So
for both.
when I'm harming myself, I've got a desire to harm myself, and I'm just harming myself. I'm not affecting the free will of another person. Of course, it's very hard to just do that, by the way. It's very hard to just do something to yourself and to no one else. It's almost impossible. But let's say that was theoretically possible. Then you'd be just harming yourself, and so the law would be acting just upon the fact that you wanted to harm yourself, and that was out of harmony with love of self, and out of harmony with God's design of you, your soul. So an example of that for most of you, suppressing your emotion. As an example. When you suppress your emotion, you're harming yourself. There's going to be a penalty on your soul for harming yourself. And the results of it often are that you go back into your intellect, you get away from your feelings, you're not able to sense things from other people. These are all parts of the penalty from harming yourself by suppressing your emotion. But when you try to suppress another person's emotion, you're doing two things. You're choosing to use your will to harm yourself, because the sin is always going to harm you, but you're also choosing to try to attempt to harm the other person at the same time. And whether they are harmed or not by your action, so a celestial spirit wouldn't even be harmed by it, but whether they're harmed or not, your intention to do it is also measured, and that brings an additional penalty to yourself.
So when you suppress your emotions and it affects the people around you, is that an intentional harm to another human soul?
Yes. It's attributed as by God's laws as such. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. Can I mention a few that I haven't mentioned yet?
Yes.
It does not reincarnate. So it does not reincarnate. It doesn't need to. So all the 14 who have returned to Earth have not reincarnated. Right? There's a different process that we've used to come back to Earth. It's not a reincarnation process. Make sense? There is no such thing as reincarnation. Definitively. Ever. Completely unnecessary for the soul. The only purpose of incarnation is to become the identity and self-aware process. So it doesn't need to happen again. It's already happened once. It doesn't need to happen again. God's laws are economical. The thing that needs to happen happens once. And that's it. Doesn't need to happen again. It's already happened. Make sense? Important to understand that as a general principle. Right? It is not a magical thing. So that when I say that, I use that term very loosely, of course. It is quite magical in the sense that how God created is amazing, but it is scientifically based upon laws, the soul's creation and how it works and what it is. It's not some kind of thing that got dreamed up uniquely just for you because you had this wonderful idea of your own. It's not a magical thing that it's a law-based thing that happened.
Can we say it's not mysterious?
It's not mysterious.
And it's not made up by me.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's not self-defined. Right? Not defined by me. Right? Very important to become aware of that, because many of you in your facade are trying to define yourselves differently. Right? And oftentimes in your facade you're trying to define yourself differently for your partner versus your workmates, versus your colleagues, versus the children, versus the parents. And you're defining yourself differently in so many different ways. And for many of you, you think that's how your personality is with those particular people. But that's all just facade. That's all not your soul. That's all what you've chosen to do to damage yourself and your self-expression. And you've done it for lots of different reasons. Some of them are encouraged by parents, and other ones were completely opposite of what your parents wanted to do. And therefore your own decisions. Yeah? Okay. Well, can we pause there? You can see, like, every statement I'm making about the human soul is like a labyrinth, isn't it? It's like there's another labyrinth I could go into if I wanted to and work out what's going on there, and then make another statement about it, and then, oh, there's another area there that I could go into. I could spend a lifetime almost examining each of these things, right? And this is what I find so fascinating about God's highest creation, of which you are one half. It is an amazing creation. It is the most complex creation in the entire universe. What goes on inside of your soul is more complicated than the universe itself. Right? You're a higher creation than God's universe is. Which is an interesting philosophical thing if you think about it, because what does that mean? At some point you might not need to exist in the universe even. You know, that's an interesting thing which some of us in the celestial spheres ponder about at times. So it's just, these things are incredible. The soul itself is an incredible creation, the most complex. In the spirit world, the most complex creation that exists in the spirit world is your spirit body. And in the physical universe, the most complex creation in the physical universe is your physical body. This is why people will be trying to understand your physical body for years to come, and unless they understand the soul and the spirit body, they're never going to grasp this physical body at all, how it works at all. And this is why, like, if doctors are honest with themselves and researchers are honest with themselves, they know that things like the brain are almost completely unknown to them in terms of knowledge that humans currently have. And our knowledge about the most complex creation, physical creation, the body, spiritual creation, the spirit body, and the soul, you know, those creations, is very rudimentary. Right, very rudimentary. Of course, when you enter the union state, you're capable of understanding it a lot better, but it's very rudimentary still, understanding. It's going to be, to understand self takes a long time, and this is why it's one of our most fascinating areas of pursuit, Mary and I. And in fact, it's a fascinating area of pursuit for many people in the celestial spheres as well as in the union state, the people who are in the union state, of which there's only a few, 7 at this stage. So, looking at all of that, the question that becomes, why does it matter? Now, can you see that if you start understanding your own soul, you will also start understanding how to use it? So doesn't that matter? It's like that's a huge thing, isn't it? To understand yourself and understand what's the best way to get the best out of yourself, right? Naturally, it's a very important thing to come to grasp. And in fact, the majority of people, I must say there are a lot of beliefs on earth that are primarily just about the human soul, that are all in error. So an example of that is reincarnation, all in error. The idea that someone can save your soul, another soul can save your soul, completely in error. Right? And you can see straight away that negates a lot of Christian belief. Just that one truth, that it's impossible for somebody to save your soul. Right? To be frank, you can't even really save it. It doesn't need to be saved. It's already there. It needs to be saved from suffering. And that's one thing you can do. Right? But nobody else can do that for you. They can educate you, but they can't do it for you. Right? So your soul can be educated, but nothing can magically be done to it by any other soul. So all of this concept that, I can heal myself. No, you can remove the sin you have, which naturally means that you will return to the state in which you were meant to be in the first place. But that's not healing yourself. That's just returning to a state that you were originally created to be in anyway. Right? You can't go beyond that state without God's love. You also cannot give God's love to someone else. Because God's love is God's love, not yours. You can give your love to someone else as long as they free will decides to accept it. Make sense? But you can't give God's love to someone else. Right? So there's a whole heap of spiritual concepts, if we really delved into them, in terms of spiritual beliefs that are on earth, that revolve around a false concept of what the human soul is capable of. And many, many people in the spirit world have had very, very dark lives in the spirit world as a result of the false beliefs being imbibed on earth. Right? There are many people who have believed in reincarnation have been very seriously harmed by the belief. Right? Many people who believe that someone can save me have been very seriously harmed by that belief. Right? And this is what we need to come to understand, is these spiritual beliefs that we hold on to about things, they matter because they result in serious pain and suffering for many, many people. Right? And in fact, some of the beliefs you're still holding on to about God and about the human soul are going to cause you suffering in your future unless you address them. Right? So it's very important to understand that these beliefs matter to you, that they are important for you to get it right. Right? Now, you're far better off having nothing right than you are getting everything wrong. And you can probably see the obvious reason for that, and that is that if you develop some beliefs and they happen to be wrong, you will pursue a life that is based upon those wrong beliefs, which will then cause future pain and suffering for you that you'll have to reverse. But if you don't have a belief and you're starting from a foundation of no belief, then at least now you might be open to accepting a truthful belief on that same subject. So this is why oftentimes the people who are agnostic on earth find spirit life a bit easier. Of course, if the true belief was taught on earth, then that would make everything a lot easier for everybody. And this is partly why the 14 Return Earth is, because we want to educate people on earth what the true beliefs are and the impact of these beliefs upon your future life. Right? So that's why we wanted to have this discussion with you about the human soul. Now, also just a point of note, you can see your interest in this subject is higher than your interest in God, which is a bit strange really in a way, isn't it? Because only by having the relationship with God will you come to understand how this thing works, right? And so in a way, putting the cart before the horse here, right? But it is something we wanted to raise in one of these discussions on this trip, because what we see is a lot of people are making suppositions about their life based on errors about how their human soul works. And if we can correct some of these errors, then that would be very helpful for them changing the direction of their life while on earth, and therefore helping them to change so that they're not so addicted to some of the concepts that they have about what they believe themselves to be. So that's the reason why we've done that. But now's the time for a break for lunch, I think, isn't it? What's the time?
Yeah, let's do it. It's
Yeah,
10 to 1.
10 to 1. So why don't we come back about 20 past 1, and we'll probably do a bit of channeling because there's a long line-up of spirits talk about these subjects. And we'll see who we get to talk to. Mary and I will talk about it a bit at lunchtime. But we want to, there have been some spirits who are talking to us about reincarnation the last day or two, who want to ask some questions, so we might get to them. But we also might get to talk to some spirits who you've heard of in books, that and sort of, so you have some kind of relationship in the sense to their life, and you can find the truth about what they now believe versus what they did believe, and things like that.
Yeah, if we don't get that today, then we'll definitely do it in future.
Yeah.
There's a few others.
Yeah.
So
Which
see
we
what
need
you
to talk
think.
about.
Yeah.
Good on. Thanks, guys.